and he had been giving the CIA information for about a year. And I had a couple of debriefings with this individual, and I had this funny feeling, Boris, that something was wrong. As a risk assessment person, you get these red flags, and you're like, ding, 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 something is wrong here. And so instead of ignoring that, I embraced that discomfort, and I was able to figure out that this individual had never been the head of a terror cell. Not just that, he'd never even been a terrorist. He had been fabricating information for an entire year. And we thought it had been good information because it turns out everyone in the village knew who Al-Qaeda was. Like even that guy, his son could have given us his information. So at first that information was good, but then when the US military ridded that village of Al-Qaeda, got rid of them, well, he still needed to feed his family. So he started fabricating information in order to get paid.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our interview with Michele Rigby Assad. Michele is an international corporate advisor and keynote speaker. She is a former CIA operative in the Middle East and a consultant for multinational companies facing complex geopolitical challenges. And Michele has played a pivotal role in high-stakes missions, both as a counter-terrorism official and as a human rights defender in the civilian world, and culminating in the 2015 airlift operation and a relocation of people persecuted in Iraqi Christians. And Michele also provides security advice to nonprofit organizations. She is an author of a recent book, Get Off the X, and she will explain what it means. This is a CIA Secrets for Conquering Obstacles and Achieving Your Life's Mission. And Michele, welcome to our Risk Management Show podcast today.
Thanks, Boris. Great to be here.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So, Michele, I believe that we will have a very thoughtful conversation on the topic of designing safe and effective operations, as well as conducting risk assessments for multinational corporations, specifically into conflict areas where you have some experience. But before that, could you tell us a short story about yourself, your career path, and what brought you to where you are right now, and what you're up to these days?
Sure. So my husband and I both got into the CIA right before 9/11. And our first overseas assignment was right after 9/11. So as you can imagine, it was quite an interesting 10 years to do counterterrorism work in the CIA. The majority of my time was spent in the Arab world. So that's my area of expertise. That's what I have a master's degree in Arab studies. And after that 10 years in the CIA, retired from government service and now have been running a boutique consulting firm based out of initially Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates, and now based out of my home state of Florida in the United States. And generally what we do is advise foreign companies doing business in the Middle East, because as you're quite aware, it's a very different environment, very different business environment, very opaque, very difficult to navigate, and carrying out your vetting of potential business partners, having conversations with senior government officials, because there's always a big aspect of diplomacy doing business in the Middle East. We get brought into those conversations because our real expertise is the nuance of Arab culture and how that affects how you design and execute operations.
Oh, very, very specific topic. We will go to further to your expertise, but let's understand the context for our members who are mostly in the risk and the governance space. What are the key operational challenges multinational corporations face when expanding in such conflict-prone areas where you have some experience?
So the first thing is that foreign businesses don't generally have knowledge of how to operate in places like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar. And those countries have very opaque systems. So you kind of have to figure it out as you go along. So the first thing, it is very hard to design operations when you don't fundamentally understand how the culture works and they don't make it easy to understand. So you don't even know if you're partnering with the right person. And there's a lot of middlemen who help you navigate that process, many of which are fabricating their access to senior government officials, fabricating their success in business. And so you don't know who to trust. You don't know who's telling you the truth. So navigating that space as a foreign business is very challenging. So there's that. Then number two, I would just say is the general instability in terms of security. So as we all know, the Israel-Palestine issue has deep ramifications for operations in the Middle East region, especially for foreigners of any kind of background that's not Arab. And so that changes on a daily basis. So when you're talking about risk assessments, personal security, security of operations in these places, it is a constantly changing landscape that requires you to have people who really understand that the cultural nuance and are watching every single development on the ground to help you not run into trouble with your business operations.
All right. So can you describe maybe a little bit more depth about this framework or methodologies that you that are most effective for conducting this risk assessment?
Sure. So yes, so we did a recent project for the American Magic, which is America's sailing team for the America's Cup. They had a regatta in Jeddah, which is the first time that the America's Cup has had a sailing event in the Middle East. So this is the first time for the American team to go, and also the European teams to go to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. So it's very interesting because, as we all know, Saudi Arabia was a no-go country for decades. I mean, they had like a do not enter sign. Unless you were Muslim or you had business operations in Saudi Arabia, you don't go to Saudi Arabia. And then suddenly we've like turned this corner, and the government of Saudi Arabia have said, we want you to come in. We want you to hold events. We want you to come here and establish businesses. It's like the opposite direction. And so everyone is flooding in. And what you have is an open government who wants you to come in and establish businesses, but it hasn't really been done before. No one knows what they're doing, and no one knows what are where are the potential hiccups, or where are the potential security issues. So with the America's Cup, the issue we were having was that there had been an upset Saudi who had gone to the U.S. consulate in Jeddah and killed one of our guards just months before the event. So the idea is, what kind of potential danger or what kind of risk is there for Americans and Europeans traveling to the kingdom? The government is warmly welcoming us, but how do we mitigate for the potential risk from just lone wolves, people who are upset for, either religious or political ideology, who find you as a target of opportunity? So what we did was even though I have a great deal of experience in Saudi Arabia, I didn't have experience in the new Saudi Arabia. So we had to go hit the ground. We had to go to Jeddah, and we had to get updated because things are changing so fast. So what is the new environment? What I know of the old Saudi Arabia no longer applies, though there are many lessons, and that knowledge carries with me to understand risk. So for us, it is so absolutely critical to get on the ground in the very specific place you're going to carry out an operation. And as we all know, countries are very different. Even within a country, you've got various subcultures. So if you're going to do business in Egypt, there's the big difference between business in Alexandria versus Cairo versus Upper Egypt. And unless you understand the differences, it's going to be hard for you to make adjustments to your ops. So for us, it's like we've got to get down on the ground, and then we've got to not just tell you what's been happening, we've got to interpret that data in a meaningful way for the company to make decisions. And so as I've seen on your channel, you talk a lot about, you can have a lot of data and no meaningful evaluation of what does that actually mean to our ops, to our business decisions. And so that's where we come in. We're saying, we have such a good grasp of Arab culture. We're going to give you the best insight that Westerners can give about this region.
Mhm. Yeah, you described how important it is to understand local stakeholders and specifically even within the country to understand difference between different regions. And as I know from my outside, I know that Saudi Arabia is building a huge new city, Neom, and
Mm-hmm.
it's never been done before, like a linear city. And interesting, but about security versus profitability. How do companies balance the need for profitability with the heightened security and compliance requirements in such an environment?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not that you don't do business, it's just that you do it smartly, right? So you have to make decisions to plan for the potential problems. So for me, it's like if I can identify the potential problems in advance or the vulnerabilities, then you can plan for them, right? And then you can build that into your uh, to make sure that you're profitable on the back end. The problem, especially with American companies and European companies doing business in the Middle East, is they don't know what those potential problems are. They don't factor them into their planning, and they're less profitable at the end. So if we can say, walking in, generally speaking, a lot of Arab companies don't make the last payment on that contract. You're going to have a 2-year contract. You can assume that you may not get the last 1 or 2 payments because that's just kind of how they do business. Then you can factor that in to your plans along the way and payments and contracts and things like that.
Interesting. So for you, especially as a woman, that is a little bit tricky to do business because I know from the news, the recent news I saw in the new Syrian government, they sent this woman from Europe, and the guy who is now in the head, he didn't
Mm-hmm.
shook the hand, and they didn't make a photo with her, so. Yeah, so it's a difficult, different cultural equilibrium between
Uh,
different.
you are not kidding. It's very interesting. You know, when I first started traveling to the Middle East as a 18-year-old, it was a long time ago, and being a female traveling in the Arab world was a very difficult, a very difficult enterprise. And I have so many years of working with Arab governments that at first felt very uncomfortable working with US officials. But then after we worked so closely together, we were so successful that like you've got the Saudis, the Emiratis who are so used to now working with women. It's like, it's great. They judge you for your expertise. But then you have the ideologues, the people like the new Syrian regime, which have a very different and sometimes much lower opinion of women. But you have got to understand what they're thinking of you if you're going to do business with them. Because I always say, unless you know what's going on in their head, you can't challenge it, you can't deal with it, you can't mitigate it, you can't influence it. So I always have to know, what does that interlocutor believe about me? And this is what I learned in the CIA handling terrorist sources. Like these guys thought women should never leave the home, and if you leave the home you should never be meeting in a room with a woman you're not related to who's uncovered. Like this is the worst of all possible. Like it's so immoral, it's so, not accepted. But I've got to deal with that terrorist and insurgent. I've got to get them to give me intelligence that I need to stop a terrorist attack. So how do you make that connection with this guy who thinks you're not intelligent, you're not experienced, you couldn't possibly know the messy politics of Iraq or wherever? And so I learned so many useful skills in learning how to work with really difficult people in the CIA.
Interesting. So maybe you can share with us. I see on the background you have your book called
Yeah.
"Get of the X: CI Secrets for Conquering Obstacles." And achieving your life's mission. So maybe you
Yeah.
can share some case studies, interesting case study, and your observation from this book.
Yeah, so get off the X. Probably a lot of folks in your audience understand this phrase, this English phrase, which is referring to how to survive an ambush or by a criminal or a terrorist or whomever. Um, your best chance of survival is to get off the site of the attack or the X. So when they're training us, when we're going to a war zone and the CIA, they're like, you got to do anything you can to get off the X in order to try to survive. And if you're in a car, your best place to be is in a car and to drive off the X. But if your car is no longer operable, your tires are shot out, there's been RPGs to your engine and your car will not move, then you've got to get out of your car and you've got to run off the X. And so essentially, I've taken this concept and I've applied it to the corporate comfort zone. Like it's so easy to fall into the ruts of the, everyday requirements of our jobs and not realize we're doing all the wrong things. Or, like I spend most of my day doing X, Y, and Z. Is that even moving the needle? Is that actually getting my company where it needs to be? And so get off the X is really kind of a clarion call to rethink everything and to push yourself forward to get unstuck in how you're doing business. And so, one of the things that made me realize how important this was in the Middle East was I was dealing with an individual that he claimed to be an emir of a terror cell or the leader of a terror cell. And he had been giving the CIA information for about a year. And I had a couple of debriefings with this individual. And I had this funny feeling, Boris, that something was wrong. As a risk assessment person, you get these red flags and you're like, ding, 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 something is wrong here. And so instead of ignoring that, I embraced that discomfort and I was able to figure out that this individual had never been the head of a terror cell. Not just that, he'd never even been a terrorist. He had been fabricating information for an entire year. And we thought it had been good information because it turns out everyone in the village knew who Al Qaeda was. Like even that guy, his son could have given us his information. So at first that information was good, but then when the US military ridded that village of Al Qaeda, got rid of them, well, he still needed to feed his family. So he started fabricating information in order to get paid. So I realized at that point, I was like, my goodness, it took me a lot of extra effort to make this realization. I wonder how many of our sources are lying to us. And oh my gosh, when I started actually taking the time and said, I'm spinning like a hamster on a wheel every day, I'm running so hard and so fast. For what? If it's all fabricated data, what am I doing here? Or what are we doing here? Me, the whole team, right, that I'm working with. And I realized that we were spending a lot of our time, and I can't even tell you exactly how much, but I would just say a majority of our time running bad sources. So the idea is like, what are you spending all your time on at work that is not getting you, not fulfilling your objectives, not moving the needle, not getting you where you need to be? You're not as successful as you used to be. So it's kind of like a stop and think, is this working or not?
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned that even CA has sometimes bad sources. When you analyze this recent events in Syria, you understand that CIA and Mossad didn't know that it can happen before 1 month and or Syria will collapse after 50 years of Assad rule, right?
Right. Yes, that's right. How tenuous the Bashar al-Assad regime had become. And I think actually a lot of us knew, and a lot of us had said, like, if Bashar goes, what comes next will be even worse. But when you look at, say, October 7th in Israel,
Yeah.
oh my God, what absolute failure of intelligence. And what I find interesting as a risk assessment expert is that there were people who saw red flags. There
Yeah.
were officers on the ground who saw behavior that did not fit the normal behavior. Like this guy always tended to his field. That field looks like it's been sold, and all these guys are conducting military operations in this field. Something is wrong. Something is being planned. And the people at the top said, shut up, stop
Yeah.
speaking, or you're going to lose your job. So I think that is a fascinating politics to unpack. Those people in leadership positions who prevent us from telling the truth of what we see. And then, of course, you end up with a giant disaster on your hands.
Yeah, exactly. So this ground level people observations, people I know the news about this 7 October. That they have some a lot of analytic data, but on the top they say, oh, this is just noise. We know everything is our conception. It never happened. Hamas is deterred. They are they want to get their money from Qatar and from other people, and they are just
Yeah.
making noise. Yeah, so
Right.
this
And
is
then, you guys know how it is. Like in our community, we understand. You see a lot of red flags, and then you see people who try to reason the red flags away, like you just said. And so and there were people in leadership that said, we just issued 10,000 new visas for Gazas to travel into Israel, work visas. There's no
mhm.
way that they would spoil this opportunity for them. Well, yeah, well, I think you've misassessed. And it turns out they did. So again, they try to reason away what you feel in your gut from what you see on the ground.
Fantastic. So I believe that this is good for first time interview. Maybe we can meet on a more specific topic. But if we summarize our interview today for someone who is listening and would like to walk away with one or two major takeaways, what would that be?
It would be to have the confidence and the courage not to ignore when you see a red flag, or not to ignore your your assessment of what could be done better in your company or your organization. Like a lot of us have these golden nuggets, and we have to find ways for our leadership to integrate them into operations. And so I would just say, continue to have the confidence and the courage to push this stuff forward. And eventually, your expertise will be demonstrated at a level that it will be respected and integrated into operations. But I would just say that that often takes time, right? So a lot of us, our companies consider risk assessments box checking exercises, which makes me crazy. I mean, that's what kind of was in the CIA sometimes. We have to find ways to demonstrate how what we're doing has big potential to influence our bigger operations. And usually we kind of figure that out when things go south, but it is have the confidence, have the courage to keep pushing that stuff forward and documenting it really well.
Fantastic. So that's were all my questions. Perhaps if I forgot to ask you something that you feel is important to our audience, please go ahead.
Oh, sure. A lot of people just kind of find my background really interesting, and they're fascinated by CIA intelligence. I have a first book called Breaking Cover. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, if you're fascinated by the psychology of terrorism, like why do people do what they do? What is it like to deal with these bad guys? So fascinating. The psychology of espionage. And, so that's a memoir, and then Get Off the X is more of like a how to get unstuck kind
Mhm.
of book. So if you're interested in
Mhm.
learning more, those are available.
All right, fantastic. Maybe you can send me after that. You can send me a link to the where people can book this, and I will put this in the show notes to this interview.
Brilliant. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Michelle, and I wish you a great success with your important and interesting job.
Thank you, Boris.
Bye bye.